with the third part of our human relations course, and this time let me revise that. It's the third part of the communications chapter of the human relations course. That's the right way to say that. So now that we are a little bit into the chapter, we are going to look at nonverbal behaviors. This is how we communicate to other people when we're not using our words. So this is your face, your body language, your intonation of your voice, the speed of your voice, all those things that are actually sending messages to other people, but they are not your words. So how can we make sure that we understand the nonverbals enough so that we convey what we try to convey? And how can we try to interpret and read other people's nonverbal behaviors? So what is nonverbal behaviors, or nonverbal communication rather? It's the process of conveying a message without the use of words. Conveying a message without the use of words. So what we are hearing here is that the person that you are communicating with is receiving something from you outside of what you're telling them. So this nonverbal communication can include gestures, facial expressions, tone of voice, timing, posture, where you stand when you're communicating. All these things send a signal. Interestingly, nonverbal communication is irreversible. It might seem obvious now that you think about it, but probably we don't walk around thinking about the fact that we are sending messages all the time and all those messages are irreversible, right? If you send a written message, an email, a memo, a text, the person can come back to you and say, hey, what did you mean here? What did you mean by this sentence or by this word? And you can clarify that. However, if you send a nonverbal message, the person tells you something, your friend tells you something, and your eyebrows shoot up, right? They are immediately knowing and reading from you, surprise, you have been surprised. Or when they anger you or make you sad, the emotions show up immediately. And in that sense, they can't be clarified because the person sees immediately your nonverbals. So that is very, very powerful. And as I was alluding to on this point here, it's fast, right? So the last bullet point on this slide says, nonverbal communication is quick. Nonverbal communication gives our thoughts and our feelings away before we're even aware of what we're thinking or how we feel, because we have this immediate reaction to something, and that can tell in our nonverbal communication. So very, very powerful stuff. Here is a table from your chapter 5 textbook, and your textbook talks about some of these, but actually not all of them. So we'll highlight a few. The table talks about, in general, things that we can do with our nonverbal behaviors or our nonverbal communication that either adds to or replaces the word coming out of your mouth, right? So the nonverbal communication that can add to or replace verbal communication, your words. So what do we do? So we can use something called adapters. Adapters help us feel comfortable or indicate our emotions or moods. So we are using our body language to somehow use something on ourselves or an object to make us feel more comfortable. I know that I have a nervous tic, right? I sometimes, when I sit in a meeting, I'll shake my legs, right? That is about body language that helps me feel comfortable in that setting, right? It's an adapter. It helps me feel more comfortable. And that's just because I always run high, sort of. I'm always wanting to be performing. And so that slight nervousness and that slight stress comes across in my shaking of my leg. They also talk about object adapters, when you use an object for a purpose other than its intended design. And so that can be something like clicking your pen, chewing your pen. So using an object, and that is signaling something. There is also something called self-adapters, and I know the table didn't list them next to each other, so you see the little you can follow the red dots on the screen. The self-adapter is something that we use on our own body that it was not designed for. So maybe you're twirling your hair, or maybe even my example about my shaking my knee, although that's probably more of an adapter than a self-adapter, but twirling your hair, pulling on your ear, something that helps you feel comfortable, that is sitting on yourself. We can also have affect displays. We can smile, we can grin, we can have our mouth point downwards, so we can express our emotions and our feelings with our body. We can complement or contradict our verbal communication. So if you're happy and you want to show that, you can do a thumbs up. You're happy but you're showing a thumbs down, that might be contradicting. So whether the verbal and the nonverbal communication is aligned or not, they can complement or contradict. Emblems is something that carries a specific meaning. So a nonverbal gesture that carries a specific meaning. So I used the example of thumbs up earlier. That would be an emblem, because you would not have to say anything. You can do thumbs up, and that means yes. This is, of course, in the North American culture. We are in the United States. In other parts of the world, thumbs up means something different. So this is North America specific. Illustrators is a body movement reinforcing a verbal message. You want to go out to dinner and you're showing with you're moving your hand in front of your mouth, signaling or illustrating that you're moving things from a plate to your mouth. That would be an illustrator. Masking is substituting more appropriate display for less appropriate displays. So your friend, you're maybe in a sad mood and your friend is asking about going to dinner, and you really don't want to, you're moping, but you're smiling even though you're not feeling it. So you're masking your less appropriate display with a more appropriate display, which is the smile. Okay, let's see. Then the last three things we haven't talked about here is regulators, repeating, and replacing. So regulators, firstly, is a nonverbal that can control, encourage, or discourage interaction. So for instance, putting your hand up might stop the conversation. That would regulate the conversation. You can also signal to the other person to speed it up, right? So you're spinning your finger, or like a police officer might do if they are controlling traffic, is they can do with their hand, show faster, faster. That would be a regulator. And then you have repeating and replacing. You can repeat the verbal communication through something in your body language, and you can replace it with something else. So we use our body language for a lot of different things, right? Okay, so here are some additional characteristics of nonverbal behavior. The first one is that it's confusing and contextual. When we are interpreting nonverbal behaviors, we need contextual clues to help us understand what they mean. So if you have a good friend, you might know their movements and their gestures. You have learned what it means when they pull on their ear or when they're scratching their head. But other people who don't know them might not know what that means. When they see them scratching their head, they might think that they are confused, and you just know that they are thinking. So nonverbal behavior can certainly be confusing, and it is contextual. It's in the situation, and we try to have to figure it out. Nonverbal behavior or communication can be intentional or unintentional, right? So it's unintentional when you get those news and you immediately react, and it shows up in your face and it shows up in your body, right? That is an unintentional nonverbal behavior. But like we just talked about on that table, we can be very intentional about that behavior as well. So you can signal thumbs up and you can smile to reinforce a message. Like we have said, nonverbal behaviors does communicate our feelings and our attitudes. So when we are talking to somebody, we are conveying our feelings and our attitudes through our nonverbal behavior. And so we have to pay attention to what our face is saying, to what our body is saying. And there was some research done in the 60s by a gentleman named Meribian, who said that 93% of the time we communicate our emotions non-verbally. 93% of the time. And at least 55% of that was our facial gestures. And that is quite powerful. Which is our last point. The non-verbal behavior that we exhibit is more powerful than our verbal. If there is misalignment between how you're acting or how your body is showing up or how your face is showing up and reacting, and that is not aligned with your words, right? So your words are saying you're happy, but your shoulders are slouching, your face is showing dread and sadness. What will people believe? They will always believe your face and your body, and they will never believe your words. So be careful with how you show up with your body and your face. So it's very important for us to be aware of our nonverbal communication. Very important. So in summary, nonverbal communication is the process of conveying a message without the use of words. It relates to the dynamic process of communication, the perception process and listening, and verbal communication. Nonverbal communication is fluid and fast, universal and confusing, and contextual. It can add to, replace verbal communication, and it can be intentional or unintentional. Nonverbal communication communicates feelings and attitudes, and people tend to believe nonverbal messages more than verbal ones. With that, we're going to close the nonverbal principles section. See you next time.